Test, test. This thing on? Because I haven't started. Einen wunderschönen guten Morgen. Nein. Der Talk gestern war über Open Source, der Talk heute ist über die Arbeit und das kann ich leider partout nicht auf Deutsch. So I'm going to do this in English because it's gotten really hard for me to speak about work stuff in German. Hello, my name is Julien. I work in the UK for a company called Olio and we make hiring software. My role there is to train more Perl developers. So specifically brought on to grow our team and start with people who don't know programming at all and turn them into software developers with Perl. Today, this is a story of a long-standing bug in DBIx class paired with undocumented default behavior and how that has shot us in the foot at work. Most of this work was actually not done by me, but one of the junior developers in my team, and I'm just a messenger. She spent several weeks working on this, and then she wrote the most crazy test file I've ever seen, which is pretty cool for someone with less than 2 years of experience. Yeah, I'm going to give you a little introduction to what that looked like. But first, who of you knows DBIx class? Okay, that's most of you. Who of you knows it reasonably well and could write a result set file like without looking things up? That's one and a half. Right, but you can all read them if you look at a result set file, so you know what's going on with the relationships and stuff, and you all know how a database works. So you should be all right. Obviously, there's several different relationships. We have belongs to, which is a many to one. We have has many, which is a one to many, so one way, the other way. There is might have, which is like a one-to-one but is optional. Then there's has one, which is a one-to-one, which is not optional. And then there's many-to-many, which is there's a bunch of things here, there's a bunch of things there. Each of them can have lots of this. Each of this can have lots of those. And then typically there's another table in the middle, of course. But many-to-many isn't a true relationship. It's just we're just showing it as well because it's relevant. Right, so just a quick recap. This is the way you define a has many relationship, and we're particularly interested in the arguments. So I'm going to use this one as an example. We can see there's the accessor name, which is in red. So that's books in our example. And then we've got the green bit, which is the name of the class that relates to. And then the yellow bit is the join condition. And that's really interesting. So in this example, it's quite simple. It's just a hash reference that says the foreign author ID should be used to find self ID. And in this case, self is the thing that we are relating on. So in this case, the schema author, or typically that would be __ package, that's self. And foreign is the other table we're joining to, so the book. So that has an author ID, and the foreign one comes first. Yeah, but it's a hash ref. And that's really simple, and you just write those and it works. And then it looks like this and works. So I said we make hiring software. So if you apply for a job at, let's say, the UK civil service, which is sort of like all of the employees of the government that aren't elected, for example, or the Metropolitan Police, there are customers as well. That's the software we make. And this is a simplified example. So we have jobs, and then you can have comments. Like a recruiter user can leave a comment on a job, but the recruiter user can also leave a comment on a candidate and maybe on an application and maybe on something else. So there's a table that holds comments, and that table holds all the comments regardless of what the comment is related to. So someone wrote the comment and the comment is about something, and we need to store what the comment is about. So making a relationship like that in MySQL is a bit weird. So we've got a column for the comment ID, and we've got a column for the class name of the Debacle object that this thing relates to, and the column for its ID. Well, yeah, so it's got like a one-to-many relationship between jobs and commons, and a one-to-many relationship between candidate and comment. But how do you do that in code? It's a bit weird. Well, I'm going to have to make my own slides bigger or look at this. Like the obvious way of doing that seems to be you put a where clause in. So you have the accessor and the related class, commons, debit comment. Then you have the condition, which join condition, which we talked about, but then you need to get in this comment type, well, commentable type is what we call it. So the class it relates to, and that would be the job. So we've put that in a where clause, which is the next argument after the condition, the attributes. Well, it's the attributes, and then in there you can have a where clause. You can have several other attributes. We'll see those in a bit. So this kind of works. But what we can't do is we can't put it at the top in the condition because you can't have actual strings there. So it has to go down. But it's the where clause, and it's sort of not really correct because you do like something like select something from this table, join this other table, and then you have a where clause that limits the join condition. That's kind of not correct, but it works. Right. So you can do this. You can get like the result set, and you get the first row, and then on like you have a job, and then from the job you can follow the comments, and then you can get the first row, and that produces select star from commons, where commentable ID is 1, and commentable type is job. Right, so that's the bottom row. That's this SQL for the bottom row, so it hasn't actually done a join. And it's very straightforward. But if we try to use that relationship in a search, and then we want to join or prefetch on it, so join is the normal way of joining in DBIx class, and if you say prefetch, it joins and then already fetches those columns and sticks them in the result object. And then if you follow the relationship in your code, it doesn't generate another query. So that's like cheaper, but it produces a bigger query, whereas otherwise it wouldn't select as many things. Right, so if we do that here, it starts going wrong. The where condition is missing. Oops. That's not very helpful if suddenly we select all the commons. And then, of course, if we have jobs and candidates and vacancies and whatever, they might have the same IDs. So half the primary key, well, half the relationship key is missing. That's not very good. So we noticed that in our code base when we tried to write a more crazy debug query. And despite there being lots of these types of relationships in our code, and like by lots I mean more than 100, not just for commons, nobody actually ever did that kind of join with it. So we didn't notice. Let's do some digging. It must be a bug, right? But, well, there's a mailing list entry, and then there is a bug report from 2011 where this behavior was raised. Bug number 63709 for DBIx class. Relationships where attributes are ignored when prefetching a relation. Right. Ribasushi in August 2011 said, "It is an obviously known issue with an annoyingly involved fix. Due to the limited utility of the where attribute, this bug has not been as of yet," and so on, fixed. Yeah, well, we had lots of these, and they all worked great until we tried to join them. Was that a bug? Nobody had noticed it. So, like, what do we do now? The stuff we want to do doesn't work. It's not great. So we tried to fix it, because obviously Ribasushi had disappeared, and he's not going to fix it in DBIx class, and no one else really seems to do much maintenance on it at the moment, unfortunately. So we tried to deal with it. What you can do, if you read a bit of code in relationship base for DBIx class, you can set a custom join condition. It's documented. It's very well hidden in documentation, but it's there. Instead of the hash reference that contains the join condition, we can pass in a code reference that gets a bunch of arguments given at runtime, and then it comes up with a join condition. And that's pretty cool. And yeah, our arguments here contain the aliases of the tables that we are joining on, so at runtime, and then it can construct the correct SQL from the thing you sent back, or rather it's actually SQL abstract data structure that then gets converted to SQL later. So in our case, what we do is like we get the foreign alias and say that's the commentable ID, and then we use the ident, which says don't take this value, but use this as the column name. So that's different. Whereas the row below, we say job, which is going to be the string job, but the one with the ident is going to actually say whatever table name .id. So this looks promising. And if we run it, the SQL now looks correct. We can see the type is there. Hooray! So it now says left join comments on commentable ID is me ID and comment type is job. That's a win. This is what the full sub now looks. The documentation says, while every coderef-based condition must return a valid on clause, it may elect to additionally return a simplified, optional, join-free condition consisting of a hashref with all keys being fully qualified names of columns declared on the corresponding result source. Don't have to remember this. This means you can short-circuit it in some cases. You can read that in the docs. So basically, in some cases, stuff is not there or is there, and then you don't have to do the whole thing because we're already in a place where we don't need it, and then you can omit things, and that really unreadable block of code makes it go faster in some cases. There were a total of 114 result set files in our code that my junior developer had to change. Some of these files had multiple relationships in them. It wasn't pretty, but she did it. Now we're done, right? Of course, we must be done. Time passes. We've shipped this really crazy big patch that someone had to code review, and they weren't happy that they had to code review it. And it's great. And then stuff goes wrong. We had expected some crazy failures, obviously. Although she'd written this massive unit test, where she'd basically taken the behavior of all of these sort of like and written them down in a unit test and then done like a before and after. A little bit like your cron job thing you were talking about, Nick. Yeah, so this problem we encountered, it is subtle, and you wouldn't really know it's there unless you were looking for it. It's actually the same junior developer found that problem while she was writing unit tests for something completely unrelated in a different ticket, and then she came across this other thing. So nope, we're not done. So as I said, our product is for hiring people, so you don't often delete things. And one of those reasons why we don't delete data, it might be because a candidate needs to have, like, the data about a candidate needs to be stored because, you know, it's the law that they need to keep data about everyone who has applied for a couple of years, and if they challenge that they haven't been hired, like, they need to be able to produce that data. And then after a certain amount of time, it has to be deleted, or first it has to be anonymized, then it has to be deleted. Another reason is GDPR. When someone makes a delete request, that's the Datenschutzgrundverordnung in German. In the UK, it's called the Privacy Act, but we might actually not have it for very long, unfortunately, if, you know, they start abolishing EU law. Anyway, let's not get into that. So we've accumulated a whole lot of stuff about a candidate, and then if the candidate says, hello, I'd like to be deleted, I want to make use of my right to be deleted, everything has to go. And the most obvious choice for how to do that in a relational database system is, of course, you do cascade delete. So you delete one record and everything just, like, you pull here and everything just goes. And that's great if it works. So their comments obviously need to go, their answers to application questions, forms they've filled in, emails we've sent them, history associated to the application, all of it all has to go. Recap. How do we do the relationships? As I said earlier, it's the same thing. There's also cascading. So the blue bit is the argument, is the attributes, where we earlier put the where. So now I can now say you can have cascade delete and cascade copy. And cascade delete 1, cascade copy 1 is the default for the has many relationship type. So if you don't put them in, that's the default. Cascade delete is on for this relationship type. And if you don't pass that, well, it will still delete. So if you don't say anything, it will cascade delete. So that stopped working. Why? It's a bit odd. So we didn't delete anymore, basically. If we weren't explicitly mentioning it, we weren't deleting anymore. So after a bit of digging, we found the default values. They're documented in DBIx class relationship base. Has many has cascade copy and cascade delete. Has one has cascade update and cascade delete. And might have has cascade update and cascade delete. And not the others. Right, so obviously, yeah, sometimes you have to read the docs. Now we have a cascade failure. So, like, we went and read the code. Why doesn't this work? Because it says in the documentation it should work, so we trusted it. But it didn't. So there was no more documentation, so we read the code. It turns out DBIx class actually disables cascade default if you give it a code reference as the join condition. So this seems to be on purpose, but it's not documented. It's this wonderful arrow here in my freehand circle. So if it's if the condition is a code reference, turn the defaults off, and then there are no more defaults. All of them are now 0. Yeah, well, this is after changing it. This is what happened. There were quite a few of these. So my colleague went through all of the changes she had made and through all of the other relationships that sort of like looked related to this. And there were quite a few. And in some cases, we had already turned the cascade off on purpose because we didn't want things to delete because they weren't actually related to, let's say, the candidate. As I said, it's much more than just candidates and comments. So those ones where we had already explicitly said we don't want the default of deletion, those were already off, and then those weren't impacted. But we still ended up with another really big, crazy patch to put all of the defaults back in. So sod implicity, just be really explicit and say, this is what I want, this is what I want, this is what I want. I don't care what the defaults are. So her test doubled in size, I believe. It's now like 3,500 lines long T file, which is mostly a massive data structure of configuration and then a very short function that is quite dynamic that says, if this bit's in the configuration, then do this and this and this. And yeah, it's great. It's great. I'm very impressed with what she's done there. Anyway, in conclusion, I can say, if you have complex join conditions, never use the where attribute. It's going to not work. Always be explicit with your cascade settings. And you should always read the docs, but maybe there aren't any. So in that case, go and read the code. Yeah, thank you very much. I believe we have time for questions. So if there are questions. Nick, yes.
Are you hiring?
Nick asked, am I hiring? I am indeed hiring. However, unfortunately, we can't hire outside of the UK because of a certain vote that happened in a few years ago, and I am only hiring junior developers, and I would be surprised if anyone was eligible for the kind of thing I'm hiring right now. But if you're interested, I have an open position right now, and we had that role open for a week, and I got 200 applications, and then I had to shut it. And this is not for people who already know Perl, it's for people who want to become a developer. And very interestingly, you can come and talk to me if you want to learn more about this, but we're targeting people who are freshly out of university, but we got so many more who had paid boot camps rather than a, UK, like a computer science related degree. So many more career shifters this year. Super interesting. If you want to learn more about how I do training in the UK, come and talk to me. It's no more lightning talks. No, sorry. Okay, more questions?
That would have been, yeah.
More questions? Yeah?
Could you have used a few for that comment checker?
Yeah, so the question was, could I have used a view or multiple views? We do that in some places. The problem is this thing isn't like, there isn't a fixed number of of things, and it's not only comments. There are lots of different things that are super dynamic and configurable, and we add more of them. So I think it would that wouldn't really work, and it would be much slower, I believe. So I think that would be such a fundamental change that while it might work, it might require manual changes every time you add a new type, and that might not be very portable or very scalable. Yeah. Yeah.
The reason why you don't have a own table for the comments about candidate or the comments about why do you have only one table for
So
the comments?
the question was, is there a reason that we use a single table for all of the comments and not one for job comments, one for candidate comments? As I said, it's not just comments. It's also so to give you a more interesting example, the way we store data for when you fill in an application form, you have to make a data container that says, this is the question, have you worked for us before? And then the answer could be yes or no, and then there's a drop down and that has yes and no. That yes and no is a list with list items, yes, list item no. And then there's the data container that refers to that list. And then you make a form, which has a form data row, and we call that an item, which refers to that data container. And then that could be used multiple times in different forms. And then every time someone fills in that form, it creates an instance of that form and stores the data for that instance of the item in that instance of the form in an incarnation of the form being filled in for that person relating to that application with that vacancy. So all of this is dynamic. When you make a new customer system, it's a SaaS product, you make a new customer system, none of this exists. It's empty, you have to configure all of it. We employ people whose job it is to do that configuration. So in short, the answer is no, we couldn't have. Yeah, bitte?
I guess it's impossible to change the default behavior of DBIC now. But is there any chance that have you already done any documentation fixes or anything else you could do in Debacle?
So the question was, have I tried to do any documentation fixes, because we obviously can't change the default behavior. So in my speaker notes, there is that I just skipped over the bit that said to do submit a patch. I don't know who is currently in charge and who would merge that patch. I also don't know exactly how to document this. I can say, careful, this is what happens, but I don't understand why. I vaguely remember that when we looked at the commit history, there was something in there, but it didn't really explain why this was happening. So there must be a reason that this is the case, but I don't know what the reason is, and I don't know if I could find out. I suspect I could ask Ribasushi. But yeah, I have thought about this, but I haven't got around to it. And listen, Wendy aren't here, so I can't get more to it. But yeah, I want to do that. I want to encourage my junior developer to do it, because obviously I want them to contribute. But that bit is really hard to do, getting them to do that, because it's very scary to submit patches to that kind of thing. Yeah, so but it's a good point, and we will do that. Any other questions? No more questions? Okay. Well, thank you very much.